Alright, London. It's a funny place, innit? I mean, you've got the touristy bit with the Big Ben and that. But then you've also got the not so nice bits that nobody warns you about. Like the tube, for instance. You're crammed in there like sardines. Right, and there's always one bloke who hasn't figured out deodorant yet. And then when you finally get off, you're in a completely different world, and you're like, I've just traveled in time. It's mental. It's like having Google Earth, but you're inside it. And then there's the pigeons. They're not scared of anything, them. They'll walk right up to you, look you in the eye and nick your sandwich. I mean, where else does that happen? But it's all part of the charm, I guess. You go for the sights and stay for the pigeons nicking your lunch. I will say though, London's got some good history. Like, not just the old stuff, but the new history too. Like, I don't know, the Shard. That's history now, innit? In a couple of years, we'll be telling kids, I remember when that was just a pile of bricks. It's all a bit mad when you think about it. But it's London, innit? You don't really question it.
Oh, Karl, you've got away with words, haven't you? You paint quite the picture. I mean, who else would compare the London Tube to a time machine? And the pigeons, I can't believe I've never noticed their thieving ways. It's like a low-budget version of Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, right in the heart of London. And the Shard as new history. That's brilliant. I suppose I'm part of ancient history then, am I? Back when the only skyscrapers in London were the pigeons soaring above Trafalgar Square. But you're right, there's something about this city that's both chaotic and charming. It's like a grumpy old man with a heart of gold. You can't help but love it, warts and all. Still, I think the best part of London, the part that really makes it special, is the people. Eccentric characters like you, Karl, who look at a city full of history and think, yeah, it's all right. But have you seen the pigeons?
Well, the way I see it, Ricky, is it's all about balance, innit? I mean, you need the flashy bits like the Shard to show off to the tourists. But then you also need the pigeons nicking sandwiches to keep us all grounded. You can't have one without the other. And as for you being part of ancient history, I wouldn't go that far. I mean, you're not quite a fossil yet, are you? Maybe a relic. You know, like one of them old coins you find down the back of the sofa. Bit worn, bit faded, but still worth something to the right person. As for the people, well, you're not wrong there. London's full of characters, and they're what make it special. Even the blokes who haven't quite worked out deodorant yet. They're all part of the charm. It's a bit like a bag of mixed sweets, London. You never quite know what you're gonna get, but it's always interesting.
Oh, Karl, you do have a way of saying the nicest things, don't you? I'm like a worn, faded old coin. I'm not sure whether to be flattered or insulted. But I suppose, in a strange way, it's a bit of both. And your analogy about London being a bag of mixed sweets, it's spot on. You're right. You could end up with a delicious toffee or a sour lemon. But it's all part of the experience, isn't it? As for the deodorant-challenged blokes on the tube, I think I'd rather deal with the fearless sandwich-nicking pigeons. But I suppose, in the grand scheme of things, they're part of the city's charm. Honestly, Karl, I think you should write a travel guide. Karl Pilkington's Guide to London. The Shard, the Tube, and the Artful Dodger Pigeons. It'd be a bestseller, I'm sure of it. Who wouldn't want to explore London through your eyes? It'd be a wild ride, that's for sure.
A travel guide? You're having a laugh, aren't you? It'd be the shortest book ever. Chapter 1. The Pigeons. Chapter 2. The Tube. Chapter 3. The Shard. And that's it. But who knows, maybe there's a market for it. As for exploring London through my eyes, I don't know about that. It's like seeing the world in black and white instead of color. But I guess it's different, innit? Not everyone wants to hear about the crown jewels and the Tower of London. Some people might prefer the sandwich-nicking pigeons and the time-traveling tube. And you're right about the sweets. It's all part of the experience. Some days you get a toffee, other days you get a sour lemon. But at the end of the day, it's still a sweet, innit? So you can't complain too much. Anyway, enough about London. It's just a city, innit? Just a bunch of buildings and people. But it's our city, and despite all the madness, I wouldn't have it any other way.
You're right, Karl. It's all about perspective, isn't it? Some people look at London and they see the glitz and the glamour. They see the royal family, the double-decker buses, and the famous landmarks. But others, like you, they see the reality. The pigeons, the tube, and the everyday madness that makes this city what it is. And you know what? I think that's beautiful in its own way. It's the real London, stripped of all the postcard perfect pretenses. It's the gritty, grubby, pigeon-infested charm that makes this city home for so many of us. And who knows, Karl? Maybe your travel guide wouldn't be as short as you think. I reckon there's a lot more to your London than just the pigeons, the tube, and the shard. Like, for instance, the blokes who haven't discovered deodorant yet. Now that's a chapter I'd be interested in reading. You're right, though. At the end of the day, it's our city. And despite all its quirks and idiosyncrasies, I wouldn't have it any other way either. London. You're a bit like the sour lemon sweet, not to everyone's taste. But those who love you wouldn't change you for the world.
Yeah, you're not wrong there, Ricky. It's a bit like one of them abstract paintings, London. You know, the ones that look like a toddler's had a go at it with a paintbrush. You look at it and you think, what's that all about? But then you step back and you see the whole picture and it all makes sense. And I'm glad you're up for reading about the blokes who haven't discovered deodorant yet. I reckon there's a story in there somewhere. Maybe it's a secret society or something. The Brotherhood of the Stinky Armpit. Sounds like a bestseller, doesn't it? But yeah, like you said, despite all its quirks, London's our city. It's a bit like a dodgy old car that's always breaking down. It drives you mad, but you can't imagine life without it. And even if you could afford a fancy new one, you wouldn't swap it. Because it's got character, and that's worth more than a shiny new paint job any day.
Ah, the Brotherhood of the Stinky Armpit, that's classic Karl. I tell you what, I'd read that book. It'd be a breath of fresh, well, maybe not fresh, but certainly interesting air. And I love your analogy of London as an abstract painting. It's true, sometimes you look at this city and it's a bit like a Picasso, all over the place. But then you step back and see the bigger picture. The vibrant chaos of it all, and it's a masterpiece in its own right. And you're spot on about the dodgy old car analogy. London is a bit like that, isn't it? It's got its quirks and it can be a bit of a handful, but it's got character. And at the end of the day, that's what matters. I mean, who wants a city that's all shiny and perfect? That's like a car with no miles on it. It's nice to look at, but it's got no stories to tell. And London, well, it's got stories aplenty. From the pigeons to the shard. From the tube to the Brotherhood of the Stinky Armpit. There's always something happening in this city. And that's why we love it, quirks and all.
Exactly, Ricky. You've hit the nail on the head there. London's like a good book, innit? It's got loads of characters. A bunch of plot twists, and you never quite know how it's going to end. And you're right about the shiny, perfect cities. They're like those people who've had too much plastic surgery. They might look alright on the surface, but there's no depth to them. No character. London's got that in spades, though. It's got more character than a Dickens novel, and that's saying something. And it's not always pretty, like those abstract paintings or the dodgy old car. But that's what makes it interesting. That's what gives it its charm. So yeah, London might be a bit mad, a bit unpredictable, and a bit stinky at times. But it's our city. And I wouldn't change it for the world. Not even for a city with less thieving pigeons and more deodorant.
You're spot on, Karl. London is like a good book. It's got drama, comedy, a bit of horror, and even some romance if you know where to look. And like any good story, it's the characters that make it special. The people. The pigeons, the buildings, they all have a part to play in the grand narrative of this city. I love your comparison to plastic surgery too. Those shiny, perfect cities, they might look good in a brochure, but there's no soul to them. London, on the other hand, wears its history on its sleeve. It's got scars and wrinkles, but they're part of its charm. They tell a story. You're right, Karl. London does have more character than a Dickens novel. And like a Dickens novel, it's not always a comfortable read. It can be grimy, noisy, and yes, a bit stinky. But that's life, isn't it? It's not always pretty, but it's real. And at the end of the day, we wouldn't have it any other way. Because it's our city, warts and all. Even the thieving pigeons and the deodorant-challenged blokes on the tube. They're part of what makes London, well, London. And I wouldn't change that for anything.
Absolutely, Ricky. It's like life's a big pot of stew and London's the spoon that stirs it all up. It's got a bit of everything in it, the good, the bad, the ugly, and that's what makes it tasty. And you're right about it wearing its history on its sleeve. It's like one of them old blokes who's got a story for every scar. And sure, not all the stories are nice, but they're real. And that's what counts. I mean, it's a bit like your face, innit? No offense, but you've got a few lines there. But they're laugh lines, aren't they? They show you've had a good time. And that's what London's like. It's got its rough bits, but they're part of the story. They show it's lived. So yeah, London's not perfect. It's a bit like a scruffy dog that's always getting into trouble. But you love it anyway, don't you? Because it's your dog. And it's the same with London. It's our city, and we wouldn't have it any other way.
Oh, Karl, comparing my face to the City of London. Now that's a first. I'm not sure whether to take it as a compliment or an insult. But I suppose, in a weird way, it's a bit of both. And I love your stew analogy. London is a bit like a hearty stew, isn't it? It's got a bit of everything in it, and not all of it's to everyone's taste. But it's the mix of flavors that makes it interesting. And you're right, those laugh lines, they're badges of honor. They show that I've lived, that I've laughed, that I've experienced life. And that's what London's all about, isn't it? It's not about being pretty or perfect. It's about being real. It's about living life to the fullest, with all its ups and downs. Your scruffy dog analogy is spot on too. London is a bit like a mischievous mutt that's always getting into scrapes. But despite all its shenanigans, you can't help but love it. Because it's your mutt. And in the same way, London is our city. And despite all its quirks and imperfections, we wouldn't have it any other way.
Well, Ricky, I mean your face in the best possible way, like a well-worn map, innit? It's been places, seen things. Same as London. And yeah, the stew, the scruffy dog, the laugh lines, it's all the same thing, innit? Life's not about being perfect. It's about being real. And that's what London is. It's real. It's messy. It's unpredictable. But it's ours. And you're right, it's not always to everyone's taste. But then, what is? I mean, even chocolate has its haters. But that's what makes life interesting, innit? The different flavors. The unexpected bits. So, yeah, maybe London's not everyone's cup of tea. Maybe it's more like a mug of strong coffee, a bit bitter. A bit strong, but it wakes you up and gets you going. And once you've had a taste, you can't help but come back for more. So, like you said, London's our city. Our scruffy, unpredictable, slightly mad city. And I wouldn't have it any other way.
Karl, you've got a way with words, you really do. Comparing my face to a well-worn map is definitely a new one. But you're right, it's seen a few things, just like London. And you're absolutely spot on about life not being about perfection. It's about the mess, the unpredictability, the realness of it all. That's what makes it interesting. That's what makes it worthwhile. And you know what, Karl? I think you've hit on the perfect analogy for London. It's like a mug of strong coffee. It might be a bit bitter. A bit strong, but it's also invigorating, stimulating, and once you've had a taste, you're hooked. So here's to London, our city. It might be a bit scruffy, a bit unpredictable, and yes, a bit mad. But it's our kind of mad. And like you said, we wouldn't have it any other way. Cheers to that, Karl.